Trident Ops. Sand vipers. The desert did not forgive. Every man who had walked its broken earth carried scars of dust and fire, and every shadow it hid promised another. Helmand Province stretched like a scar across Afghanistan, a wound that refused to close, and tonight 6 men were sent to cut deeper into it. The briefing room was a box of fluorescent hum, its walls plastered with maps and satellite imagery. The air smelled of stale coffee, dry erase markers, and the iron stillness before storm. Chief Jason Cole stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the projection that glowed against the far wall. He said nothing, not yet. He didn't have to. The men around him, his men, sat in silence, eyes forward, waiting. The CIA handler talked too much, words spilling about opium networks, Taliban financing, and Iranian hands guiding from the shadows. His tie was crooked, his face pale beneath the fluorescent light. He spoke of crates moving through compounds, tunnels beneath the earth, millions flowing across borders to feed the serpent of war. He didn't understand the men he briefed. He thought detail mattered, but Cole knew all that mattered was the mission. Get in, rip the heart out, and burn what was left. Ghost leaned back in his chair, silent as ever, eyes half-lidded but sharp beneath the mask of stillness. Ethan Ramirez didn't fidget, didn't move, didn't give away a thought. But Cole knew his sniper was cataloging every word, every image, filing it into the Cole vault where he kept everything. Ghost spoke rarely, but when he did, it mattered. Brick sat forward, elbows on knees, massive hands clenched. Marcus Johnson looked like he was about to explode, not for nerves, but anticipation. His eyes tracked the maps, but his grin was for the crates of C4 and rockets stacked back at the armory. Brick lived for the breach, for the thunder of walls collapsing, for the chaos that came after. Samir Haddad, docked to them all, sat with his fingers steepled, the calm weight of thought in his eyes. He was always steady, always measured. Where Brick burned, Doc cooled. Where others saw objectives, Doc saw consequences. He carried the ghosts of every man he had patched, and every one he hadn't been able to. Tyler O'Shea, Havoc, hunched over his tablet even now, already probing, already digging through spectrums for signs of chatter. He was slight, wiry, with eyes that burned too fast, too sharp. The battlefield he owned was invisible, but no less real. Wires, signals, static, that was his world. Logan Walker sat stiff in his chair, posture too rigid, helmet not yet fitting in the way it should. Kid, they called him because he was fresh out of BUD/S. His Trident still new, his skin still raw. He had passed everything, earned his place, but that didn't matter to men who had bled together in fire. Kid had yet to prove he belonged, not to himself, not to them. The CIA man droned on, pointing to red circles and green lines, his words fading into background static. Cole finally cut him off with a nod, the kind that dismissed a man without speaking. The handler faltered, gathered his papers, and slipped out, leaving the 6 alone. Silence settled, heavier than before. Cole straightened, voice low, steady, carrying weight. Target is a compound outside Sanjan. Satellite shows fortified walls, multiple heat signatures, tunnel systems. Secondary intel suggests Iranian comms equipment on site. That means this isn't just Taliban. This is Tehran's money, Tehran's men. Our job is simple. Go in, dismantle, burn it to ash. No loose ends. No survivors if they stand in our way. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Each man knew the weight. Each man carried it differently. Ghost folded his arms and closed his eyes, already walking the angles in his head. Brick's grin widened, hungry. Doc exhaled, the faintest shake of his head, already bracing for what was coming. Havoc's fingers twitched across his screen, phantom keystrokes in the air. Kid swallowed, throat tight, eyes fixed forward as though fear itself was a target he could shoot. Cole ended it with the words that always ended it. Will's up in 2. Gear up. The armory smelled of oil and dust, the familiar perfume of men who lived by steel and powder. Rifles lined the walls, their matte black bodies gleaming under the light. Packs waited, heavy with explosives, charges, tools of precision and destruction. Ghost stripped his rifle with silent precision, each movement methodical, practiced, sacred. He cleaned, oiled, reassembled, checked optics, adjusted scope. His ritual was not of superstition, but necessity. A rifle that failed was a brother dead. Brick loaded charges into his pack, humming low, the sound almost a growl. He tested fuses, tapped detonators, muttered to himself. The weight on his back was always heavier than the others, but he carried it like air. Chaos rode with him, always. Doc laid out his kit, each piece checked, rolled, folded. Bandages, gauze, morphine, clamps, shears, IVs. His tools saved lives, but he carried them with the grim knowledge they couldn't save all. He ran his fingers across the cross stitched into the pouch flap, a habit, a reminder before tucking away. Havoc sat cross-legged on the floor, tablet open, headset in. He was already fighting the unseen war, listening, probing, cutting into frequencies. He muttered notes into the net, patterns only he understood, signals he would strangle when the time came. Kid moved stiff, clumsy, checking and rechecking his rifle, his armor, his helmet. He tried to hide it, but they all saw. Cole let him. Fear wasn't weakness, not yet. Fear was the forge. If Kid survived tonight, the fire would shape him. Cole checked last, not because he needed to, but because they did. He moved down the line, eyes sharp, hands adjusting straps, slapping magazines into pouches, checking every man. When he finally loaded his own rifle, there was no ceremony, no hesitation. He was already in the fight. 2 hours later, the hello swallowed them. The ramp groan closed, the world outside cut away. The bird lifted, rotors hammering the night, the ground falling away until only darkness stretched below. Inside, 6 men sat in silence, the air thick with fuel, sweat, and the copper taste of anticipation. NVGs glowed faint, lenses painting the world green, eyes hidden behind them. Cole gripped the overhead handle, boots planted, body swaying with the bird. His mind was already in Sanjin, already in the compound, already making choices that would bleed. Ghost sat still, rifle upright between his knees, breath slow, steady, the calm a man who would kill without hesitation. Brick leaned back, grin sharp, fingers tapping on the block of C4 strapped to his vest. Doc's eyes moved across the team, cataloging, measuring, already preparing for wounds that hadn't been made yet. Havoc bent over his tablet, the glow faint under its shield, his lips moving with silent calculations. Kid sat nearest the door, helmet tilted, hands clenched too tight on his rifle. He stared into the dark, as though he could already see the desert rising to meet him. The red light bathed them, warning of descent. Cole raised his fist, 6 eyes locking in. 2 minutes. The hand dropped, fingers spread into a claw. 1 minute. The bird banked low, Sangin's broken land rushing up to swallow them. The ramp yawned open, desert air slamming inside, hot, dry, carrying the stink of diesel and poppy fields. One by one they spilled into the night, boots sinking into dust, knees bending low as the hello roared away. Its thunder faded until only silence and the hiss of sand remained. The mission had begun. The hello's thunder faded into the black sky, leaving behind only the hiss of sand and the low whine of distant insects. 6 men crouched in the dust, the desert breathing around them, alive with heat that clung even in the dead of night. Ghost took point without a word. He slithered forward, low to the ground, rifle tight against his shoulder. His movements were liquid, silent, more shadow than man. Cole followed, every step placed with purpose, boots sinking into dust without sound. Behind them Brick lumbered, heavier, but even his weight was measured, trained to vanish into the night. Doc and Havoc trailed, close and deliberate, while Kid brought up the rear, his breath too fast, his eyes darting across dunes that all looked the same. The desert stretched endless, a sea of sand broken by irrigation ditches and the skeletal lines of half-dead poppy fields. The moon was a thin blade overhead, carving faint silver across the land, but NVGs turned it all into shades of emerald. The compound lay 2 kilometers ahead, its mud walls little more than a smudge against the horizon. Cole raised a fist, the team halting, sinking low into the sand. He scanned the horizon, every nerve alive, every shadow suspect. Ghost moved beside him, scope up. I pressed, searching for movement. Minutes passed in silence, the kind of silence that gnawed at nerves and sharpened instincts. Finally, Ghost's breath hissed softly in the net. Rooftop. One man. NVGs painted him clearly, slumped against a wall, rifle across his lap, head nodding with fatigue. Ghost's finger tightened against the trigger, then loosened. He looked to Cole. Cole raised 2 fingers, then curled them down. Ghost's shot whispered into the night, suppressed and final. The guard slumped sideways, lifeless, his body folding into shadow. Ghost shifted his scope, scanned again, then gave a small nod. Clear for now. They moved again, the compound drawing closer with every crawl, every shuffle. The air smelled of manure and diesel. The faint sickly sweetness of poppies carried on the wind. Cold gut tightened. He had walked into compounds like this before. Fortified walls, quiet at night, death waiting inside. They were never simple. Kid stumbled, his boot catching on a rock, the sound sharp in the silence. Every head turned. Cole's glare cut into him, and Kid froze, breath locked in his chest. Doc's hand reached back, steadying him, pulling him into motion again. Kid swallowed hard, shame burning in his throat, and forced his steps silent. The wall loomed, tall and jagged, mud baked hard by years of sun. Ghost flattened against it, listening. Inside, faint voices carried, laughter muffled, the clatter of metal on stone. Fighters awake, alive, careless in their confidence. They had no idea death waited just outside. Cole crouched beside Brick, tapping the wall with 2 fingers, then slicing across with his hand. Silent breach. Brick nodded, grin flashing in the dim glow of NVGs. He unspooled det cord, fingers moving fast, precise despite their size. He set the charges small, surgical, just enough to whisper open a hole. Havoc crouched low, his tablet glowing faint under a blackout hood. His voice was a murmur in the net. Multiple signals inside. At least a dozen radios, maybe more. Stronger equipment than Taliban usually carry. Iranian build. His words cut through Cole's chest like ice. Tehran's fingers were here, curled deep into the dirt of Helmand. Cole raised a fist, the team freezing. He scanned their faces, Ghost calm, Brick hungry, Doc steady, Havoc sharp, Kid pale but firm. He nodded once. The charges hissed, then popped, the wall coughing dust into the night. Brick shoved the rubble inward, the hole wide enough for a man. Ghost slid through first, silent as smoke, rifle raised. Cole followed, Brick next, then Doc, Havoc, and Kid. One by one, they vanished into the compound, shadows swallowed by deeper shadow. The air inside was thicker, damp with the smell of manure and sweat. Courtyard dirt stretched wide, scattered with cooking fires now cold, with crates stacked against the walls. A goat bleated faintly, tied to a post, its sound sharp in the silence. Ghost raised a hand, signaling hold. A door creaked open across the courtyard, faint light spilling. A fighter stepped out, scratching his beard, rifle slung loose. He yawned, muttered something under his breath, and started toward the goat. Ghost moved before the man, even knew he was not alone. His gloved hand clamped the fighter's mouth, his blade sliding quick, clean. The body sagged, lowered silent into the dirt. Ghost's eyes met Cole's, cold and certain. They pressed deeper, clearing corners, rifles trained, eyes sharp. Every doorway was a mouth that could spit fire, every shadow a trigger waiting to be pulled. Kid's breath rasped in his helmet, too loud in his ears, but he forced his rifle steady, his eyes fixed where Cole pointed. A shout rang out. A door slammed. The compound erupted with sound, boots stomping, voices shouting, weapons clattering. The quiet insertion was gone. Cole's voice cut sharp into the net. Contact. The first shots cracked, splinters exploding from the wall near Cole's head. He dropped to a knee, firing into the dark. Ghost's rifle sang, two fighters collapsing before they cleared their doorframe. Brick roared forward, gun thundering, his laugh booming even as rounds sparked against stone. Doc shoved Kid behind cover, his own rifle barking fire. Havoc shouted into the net, enemy comms spiking, reinforcements already being called. The compound was alive, every wall a muzzle flash, every doorway a mouth of fire. The fight had begun. The first volley turned the courtyard into a storm. Muzzle flashes tore through the dark, bullets carving splinters and sparks from mud walls. Cole pressed flat, dirt spraying his visor as rounds stitched the air inches from his face. He exhaled once, calm, raised his rifle, and fired 3 shots measured and final. 3 shadows fell, their weapons clattering on stone. Ghost flowed beside him, always moving, never rooted. His shots were whispers, each one a punctuation mark in the dark. A fighter lunged through a doorway, rifle spraying wild, and Ghost dropped him with 2 rounds stitched clean across the chest. He rolled sideways, sighted again, another shape falling before it ever raised its weapon. His calm was unshakable, a surgeon's rhythm even in chaos. Brick surged forward, laugh booming through the net, weapon blazing in long, savage bursts. He hammered a doorway, wood exploding into shards, bodies folding inside. His bulk filled the courtyard, a walking wall of fire and steel. He slapped a charge against the next door without slowing, the explosion shredding it into splinters as he stormed through, gun roaring, a beast let loose. Doc dragged Kid into cover as the young SEAL froze under the storm. Kid's eyes were wide, breath sharp and ragged, rifle clutched, but not firing. Doc's voice was steady in his ear, low and firm, grounding him even as rounds screamed overhead. Breathe. Aim. Fire. Kid's jaw clenched, his hands steadied, and he raised his rifle. His first burst was wild, chewing stone, but his second caught a fighter in the chest, dropping him mid-stride. Doc's hand clapped his helmet once, quick and firm, then turned back to fire with his own precision. Havoc crouched behind a stack of crates, his tablet glowing faint under its blackout hood. His voice cut sharp through comms, controlled chaos. Multiple signatures inside, 2 squads moving through tunnels. Iranian frequency spikes. He snarled as he bent the air, drowning enemy chatter in static, cutting coordination into jagged fragments. But still, he heard enough. The Taliban weren't alone. Tehran's shadows were here, guiding them. A fighter burst from a side room, RPG slung over his shoulder. Cole's voice snapped in the net, sharp and final. RPG. Brick spun, gun roaring, shredding the man before he could fire, the rocket clattering harmless to the dirt. The next doorway spewed fire, rounds chewing through crates, sparks flying. Ghost sighted, his shot threading through the muzzle flash, silencing it mid-burst. The compound's walls shook with thunder as Brick's charges tore holes through barriers, each explosion a heartbeat in the storm. Dust choked the air, smoke curling thick, the smell of cordite and blood clinging to every breath. Fighters poured through hallways, shouting in Dari, Arabic, commands echoing from unseen leaders. They were coordinated, disciplined, not the usual chaos. Kodisku twisted. Tehran's hand was deeper than he feared. He signaled Ghost to sweep left, Brick to breach right. Doc pulled Kid with him, covering the center. Havoc stayed close, bent over his tablet, his ears in a battle no one else could hear. Cole pushed forward, rifle raised, his mind already 3 moves ahead. Ghost slipped into the left hall, silent and lethal. His rifle snapped once, twice, bodies falling in the dark. He cleared a stairwell, moving upward, NVGs catching a rooftop, gunner sighting on the courtyard below. Ghost shot pierced the man's skull, his body toppling soundless into the dust. From above, Ghost cut down 2 more before sliding back into shadow. Brick's breach roared on the right, the wall collapsing into the next room. He stormed through, laughter ragged, his weapon chewing the enemy into shreds. He was fire, unstoppable, his bulk filling the narrow hallway, muzzle flashes lighting the walls. He kicked bodies aside, ripped another charge free, slapped it against a steel door, and the blast tore it into molten fragments. His roar carried over comms, wild and unbroken. Doc and Kid moved with Cole, clearing the central rooms one by one. Doc's rifle barked steady, calm, every shot measured. Kid's was rougher, sharper, but each burst grew truer, steadier, his fear carving itself into focus. A fighter lunged at them from the shadows, knife raised, and Kid's reflex fired a burst into his chest, the man collapsing at his feet. Kid stared down, breath heavy, Doc's hands steadying him again. Keep moving. Havoc hissed over comms, multiple reinforcements inbound from the tunnels, pushing up fast. Cole clenched his jaw, eyes scanning the courtyard. The surface wasn't the fight. The real nest was below. He rallied the team, signals flashing, voice iron. Collapse the surface, take the tunnels. Ghost slid back into formation, his rifle still hot. Brick emerged from the smoke, grinning, blood and dust smeared across his armor. Doc steadied Kid at his side. Havoc's tablet screeched, signals spiking. Cole pointed downward, toward the tunnel entrance at the far end of the courtyard. The compound above was fire and ruin. The true battle waited below. The last fighter on the surface collapsed against the courtyard wall, his weapon clattering across the dirt. Smoke curled from shattered doorways, flames licked at the edges of splintered wood, and the night air stank of blood and cordite. But Cole's gut knew the truth. This wasn't the end. The real nest waited below. He signaled toward the stairwell, the tunnel mouth gaping dark at the far side of the courtyard. Ghost moved first, rifle raised, every step liquid silence. Cole followed, brick at his shoulder, Doc guiding Kid close, Havoc bent low over his tablet, antenna trembling in his hand. The earth breathed heat from below, damp and heavy, carrying the faint metallic hum of generators. The stairwell dropped them into black. Walls of packed earth pressed tight, beams braced the ceiling, dripping with condensation that smelled of mold and rot. Ghost's NVGs painted the narrow hall green, every shadow stretched long, every corner a potential muzzle flash. His breath never changed, slow and even, a rhythm that steadied the others behind him. Voices echoed from deeper in, rough shouts, the scrape of boots, the metallic clatter of weapons. Cole raised his fist. Hold! He crouched, listening. The words carried faint but clear enough. Dari, Arabic, another voice with a heavier accent, clipped and precise. Iranian. He felt it cold in his chest. Tehran was here. Brick's grin glimmered in the green glow, fingers brushing the charges on his vest. Cole shook his head once. Not yet. Silence was their only shield down here. Brick shrugged, lips curling into the reckless smile he wore like armor. They pushed deeper, rifles raised, NVGs slicing through the dark. The tunnel curved, then opened wider into a chamber. Crates were stacked high, their markings clear in the green glow. Farsi lettering, Iranian cereals, stamp dates fresh. Rifles, RPGs, mortars, enough to fuel a war. Cole's jaw clenched, but before he could signal, boots thundered from the far side. A squad surged into the chamber, weapons already raised, eyes glowing with NVGs. The firefight erupted in a storm of muzzle flashes, deafening in the confined space. Ghost dropped low, his rifle whispering precision, bodies folding before they even knew they were targeted. Cole fired in bursts, measured, cutting through the chaos. Brick roared, weapon chewing the squad into splinters of blood and dust. Doc pressed Kid against the wall, firing steady, guiding his aim. Kid's rounds tore into the dark. One fighter collapsing in a scream cut short. The tunnel walls shook with the thunder, dirt cascading from the ceiling, the air choking with grit and smoke. One fighter lunged from the shadows, blade raised, slamming into Kid. They crashed against the wall, Kid's rifle twisting in his hands. The knife glinted green, arcing down. Kid's arm buckled, panic rising. Doc was there, slamming his rifle stock into the fighter's skull, the man crumpling in a heap. Kid gasped, chest heaving, Doc's hand steadying him. Stay in it. Don't break. The chamber fell silent. Bodies sprawled across the dirt. The air stank of blood and oil, acrid smoke burning lungs. Havoc crouched over a radio pulled from a corpse, his fingers moving fast, tablet glowing faint. His voice cracked through the net, urgent. Signals spiking below. Encrypted chatter. They know we're here. Reinforcements inbound. And something else. Hardline feeds. Not Taliban. IRGC control node. Cole's eyes cut to the far tunnel, where faint light glowed deeper underground. He felt it then, the weight of the mission shifting beneath his boots. This wasn't about drugs or rifles. This was command, Tehran's hand reaching through Hellman. He signaled forward. Go slid into the tunnel first, rifle up. The air grew hotter, the hum of generators louder, cables snaking across the floor. The walls pressed closer, every breath tight, every step echoing too loud. The tunnel bent, then ended at a steel door reinforced with bolts and beams. Brick grinned wide, already pulling a charge from his pack. Cole gave a nod, and the explosion thundered through the earth, the door collapsing inward in a bloom of dust and fire. What lay beyond froze them all. Banks of servers blinked in the dim glow, towers humming, cables feeding into satellite uplinks. Screens glowed with maps, financial trails, encrypted orders. Tehran's fingerprints covered everything. This was no smuggling hub. This was a war room buried beneath the dirt of Hellman. Anot fidink Izbola, Amas, Uti. Havoc's eyes lit, his hands flying across the keys. He ripped data onto drives, screens spitting numbers, maps, names. But then the code changed, the purge beginning. Red warnings blinked, lines of Farsi filling the screens. Self-destruct. The IRGC had built fail-safes. Havoc cursed, ripping as much as he could, his tablet screaming with heat. Brick cracked thermite, hissing fire beginning to eat through the racks. Sparks showered, the servers shrieking as metal melted. Doc watched the rear, Kid beside him, rifles raised, breath sharp. Ghost crouched at the entrance, his scope sweeping. Then the tunnels roared with boots. Shouts carried closer, rifles clattering, voices hard and sharp. Iranian accents cut through the dark, orders barked. Kodes Gutzank. Not Taliban, not proxies. Quds force. The nest was awake. The first wave came fast, boots hammering the packed earth. Rifles raised as beams of flashlights cut through the dark. Ghost fired first, his suppressed shots whispering death into the tunnel. The lead fighter collapsed without a sound. The second dropped before his mouth could form the shout that would carry down the passage. But there were too many shadows stacked behind shadows, their numbers a flood. Cole barked sharp into the net, his voice steady iron. Hold the choke. Brick dropped to one knee, his weapon thunder rolling through the confined space. Muzzle flashes painting the walls white and green. Dirt cascaded from the ceiling, the air choking with smoke and grit. Fighters crumpled in the narrow corridor, bodies jamming the passage, but more pressed forward, climbing over their dead, firing blind bursts that sparked against stone. Doc leaned around cover, his shots clean, deliberate, each burst carving silence into the chaos. Beside him, Kid's rifle barked sharp, his fear carved into focus by the storm. His rounds found targets now, each one truer, steadier, a rhythm forming in the chaos. Doc's hand clapped his helmet once, wordless praise, before returning to fire. Havoc crouched low, tablet pressed against his chest, sweat dripping beneath his helmet. His jammer screamed into the ether, flooding comms, twisting Iranian orders into static. But their discipline showed. They shifted to hand signals, whistles, silent pushes. They weren't breaking. They were trained, hardened, CODS force operators pressing into the dark. The tunnel became a meat grinder, bodies stacking, blood pooling, the stench of copper mixing with the heat of generators and the chemical burn of thermite eating the servers behind them. Sparks rained, steel dripping molten, the war room shriveling in fire, but it wasn't enough. Too much remained. Cole's mind raced. If they couldn't erase it all, they'd at least deny Tehran the chance to use it. Brick slapped a grenade into the choke, the blast roaring, dirt showering down as the tunnel walls trembled. Screams cut off, silence blooming for half a heartbeat before fresh boots thundered closer. They kept coming, relentless, waves of shadows, their courage carved from fanaticism and discipline. Ghost shifted, his scope catching movement higher, an overhead shaft, a ladder, fighters dropping from above. He spun, firing upward, 3 men tumbling in silence, their NVGs cracking against stone. But more followed, sliding down, their rifles already up. Cole ripped a flashbang from his vest, yanked the pin, and hurled it. The tunnel erupted in white fire and thunder, screams filling the dark as men clawed at their eyes. The team surged forward, cutting them down before sight returned. Doc's voice cracked sharp over comms. Man down. Kid was on the dirt, a round slicing across his arm, blood pumping hot and fast. Doc dragged him back, gloves slick, tourniquet snapping tight as he barked orders in a kid's ear. Stay with me. You're not done. Kid's teeth clenched, his other hand refusing to let go of his rifle, even as pain carved his face. Doc's steady hands pulled him back into the fight, blood still dripping, but life intact. Brick roared through the net, his voice wild as he slammed another charge into the tunnel wall. The blast collapsed part of the passage, burying a squad in stone and dust, screams muffled beneath the earth. The team fell back deeper into the war room, the air thick with fire and sparks. Thermite hissed and spat, servers groaning as their circuits fried, the smell of melting plastic suffocating. Havoc shouted, his tablet alive with chaos. They're triggering remote wipes. Satellites feeding back. Data bleeding fast. His fingers flew, ripping fragments, snaring slivers of Tehran's web, shoving them into drives that glowed with heat. His face was a mask of fury, the invisible battle cutting him raw. Cole pulled him back, his voice hard. Time's up. Burn it. Havoc tore the last drive free, clutching it to his chest like a lifeline, as Brick cracked more thermite across the racks. Fire roared higher, heat pushing them back, smoke clawing lungs. Then the next wave hit. Heavier boots, sharper fire, tracers stitching the dark. These weren't Taliban, weren't recruits. They were IRGC Quds Force, rifles barking in controlled bursts, grenades bouncing off dirt. Cole dropped one with a clean burst, then another, his body moving on instinct, his mind a razor's edge. Ghost cut down the flank, his shot surgical, his scope never missing. Brick poured fire, his laughter ragged, his weapon chewing shadows into silence. Doc fired even as his hands pressed against Kid's wound, his focus unshaken. Kid gritted his teeth, his rifle still spitting, pain ignored, fear burned away. The tunnel walls trembled, chunks collapsing as explosions echoed deeper. The enemy wasn't just coming. They were collapsing passages, driving the SEALs toward dead ends, funneling them like prey. Cole felt the weight of it. They weren't meant to leave alive. Tehran wanted this node gone, and the men who had seen it buried with it. He barked into the net, sharp, final. Exfil route east. Move. Brick slammed charges into the side walls, the blast tearing new holes into side tunnels. They didn't know where they led, but forward was death. The team slid through, lungs burning, the tunnel shaking as the war room behind them collapsed in fire and stone. They crawled, ran, stumbled through twisting earth, walls pressing tighter, ceilings dripping, boots splashing through mud. Behind them, shouts echoed, Iranian voices barking commands, the hunt unbroken. Ghost dropped stragglers who pushed too close, his rifle whispering death into the black. Brick left charges behind, each one collapsing another route, burying pursuers in rubble. Doc pulled Kid forward, hand steady, voice sharp. Stay with me. Don't fall. Havoc clutched his drive, his fingers raw from keystrokes, his chest heaving. Cole led them all, his rifle ready, his eyes burning forward, one thought anchoring him. Get them out alive. The tunnel bent, then rose, faint air flowing down from above. Ghost pointed, silent, his scope catching a sliver of night through a cracked grate. Cole pushed forward, Brick tearing the grate loose, the cool breath of desert air washing over them. They climbed one by one, dragging themselves from the earth, lungs heaving, armor scraping stone. They emerged into open desert, the compound burning behind them, flames clawing the sky, smoke spiraling into the stars. The air was cooler here, cleaner, but no safer. Headlights speared the dark, engines roared closer, drones whining above. The hunt hadn't ended. The desert was waiting, and death was coming with it. Cole raised his fist, the team forming around him. 6 men, battered, bleeding alive. They had ripped into Tehran's shadow and lived to crawl out, but the serpent wasn't done. Not yet. The desert air hit them like a hammer as they clawed free of the tunnel, lungs dragging in the cooler night. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The hiss of wind across dunes, the crackle of flames behind them, the faint bleat of a goat left tethered in the courtyard above. Then the world roared alive. Engines, headlights bouncing across the horizon, the guttural shouts of fighters pouring in from all sides, drones whining, rotors slicing the sky. Cole's hand shot up, fist clenched. Form. Ghost dropped prone, his rifle already whispering, the first driver slumping against his wheel as a truck veered and rolled, tumbling across the sand in a storm of sparks and screams. Brick ripped a tube free, his grin ragged, and shouldered the rocket. The warhead streaked into the night, striking a pickup mid-charge, turning it into a bloom of flame that lit the desert like day. Doc dragged Kid behind cover, checking his arm with one hand, firing with the other. The tourniquet held, blood slowed, but the wound burned hot. Kid's jaw clenched, pain clawing at him, but he kept his rifle up. His rounds barked into the dark, cutting through shadows that closed in too fast. Doc's voice was calm, steady, the anchor that kept him in the fight. Havoc crouched low, antenna raised, his tablet alive with static and code. His jammer screamed, bending enemy comms into chaos, drones shuddering in their flight. But one broke free, missile streaking down, the explosion tearing sand and sky apart. The blast threw them sideways, helmets slamming stone, ears ringing with fire. Havoc cursed, slammed a fresh battery into the pack, his fingers raw but relentless. Cole pushed up, his rifle cutting bursts into the advancing horde. His chest burned, his legs heavy, but his voice never faltered. Push east. Move. They ran. Boots sank into sand, lungs dragged fire, every step heavier than the last. The desert stretched endless, dunes rising and falling like waves of an ocean determined to swallow them whole. Behind, headlights speared the night, trucks bounding over ridges, fighters screaming as they fired into the dark. Tracer fire cut the air, red lines hissing past their heads. Ghost dropped to one knee, sighted clean, and a gunner folded over his DSHG, the heavy weapon falling silent. He rolled sideways, fired again, another driver slumping as his truck fishtailed into a dune. His rhythm never broke, even as blood soaked through his sleeve, his face cold behind NVGs. Brick's rockets thundered, his laughter ragged, fire blooming across the sand. Each shot tore another truck into flame, each explosion shaking the ground beneath their boots. He roared into comms, his voice wild, alive, even as exhaustion dragged at him. He was chaos embodied, the hammer of their fight. Doc pushed Kid forward, keeping him moving, his hand never leaving his shoulder. His rifle barked bursts, precise and final, his mind splitting between medicine and fire. Kid stumbled, pain dragging him down, but Doc's hand steadied him, his voice sharp in his ear. Stay with me. You're not done. Kid gritted his teeth, forced his legs to move, his rifle still barking defiance. Havoc's voice cracked sharp over comms. Multiple drones inbound. Armed. He dropped to a knee, fingers flying, static spiking. The first drone shuddered, spiraled, crashed into sand in a ball of fire. The second broke through, missile lancing down, the desert erupting again. Cole threw himself over Kid, shielding him as grit and fire swallowed them. His ears rang, his chest burned, but he pulled the young SEAL up, shoved him forward. Not here. Not now. The chase stretched, endless waves of fire and steel. Trucks roared closer, headlights blinding, weapons spitting sparks. Ghost scopes sang, Brick's rockets thundered, Doc's bursts never wavered, Kid's rifle grew steadier. Havoc Spectrum War bent drones from the sky. Cole anchored them all, his voice iron, his rifle barking, his presence the weight that kept them from breaking. But exhaustion gnawed. Their lungs burned, their legs heavy, their bodies raw. Sweat cut through dust, stinging eyes, choking throats. Brick's rockets dwindled, his grin sharp but fading. Ghost's arm bled steady, his face pale beneath NVGs. Kid's wound screamed with every step, but he refused to fall. Doc's kit was half spent, his hands stained red. Havoc's batteries drained, his jammers sputtering. Cole's chest burned with every breath, his body screaming, but he pushed forward because there was no other choice. The desert became a gauntlet, fire and shadow, every dune a trap, every ridge alive with muzzle flashes. The SEALs carved their way through it, step by step, bullet by bullet, their world narrowed to survival. Ahead, the valley loomed, dark and jagged, cliffs rising on either side. Gut clenched. A choke point, a trap, but also cover. And the bird was inbound. Havoc's comms hissed with the faint thunder of rotors. 2 minutes out. 2 minutes of forever. Cole's fist clenched. Into the valley. Hold it. Extract. They surged forward, lungs ragged, bodies battered, rifles still hot. Behind them, the desert burned with fire and death. Ahead, the valley waited. The last stand was coming. The valley tightened around them like a vice. Black rock rising on both sides, shadows stacked on shadows. Cole drove them to the first bend and dropped a palm, the team peeling into positions without a word. Ghost crawled to a shelf of stone on the left wall, rifle already settling. The scopes glow a quiet star in the dark. Brick took the right wall and went to work, planting small surprises along the entry line. Shaped charges tucked into fractures, a pair of directional mines face down the throat. Doc pulled Kid behind a boulder the size of a truck tire, checked the tourniquet, pressed a clot pad deep, taped hard, then angled the young man to a killing lane that crossed with Havoc's. Havoc knelt with his back against stone, tablet under a blackout hood. The spectrum was a snarl of hostile bursts and encrypted chirps. He slid the jammer power up, split it into narrow bands, and started chopping enemy coordination into isolated islands. A drone drifted high above the valley mouth, its optics searching. Havoc threw noise at its link and watched it stutter like a bird in a headwind. Not down, not out, but blind enough to buy seconds. Seconds were life. Engines rolled in, first as a growl, then as teeth. Headlights swept the bend and splashed against rock, and Ghost clipped the lead beam with a round through the housing. The light died in a pop, and the driver's skull followed a heartbeat later. The truck yawed, snapped sideways, and jammed the lane, bedmen tumbling in a spill of bodies and rifles. Cole counted a slow 3, then snapped his laser across the rock face. Brick's first charge went off with a flat slap against stone. Shards scythed the packed fighters, and the valley filled with a metallic chorus of ricochets. Ghost stitched the survivors, smooth and unhurried. On the right, a second truck tried to nose through the jam. Brick shouldered a tube, exhaled, sent a warhead down a corridor of dust and muzzle flash. The pickup lifted at the front, slammed on its back, and burned. Return fire arrived in sheets. Tracers sparkled like hornets over their heads, and rock dust filled the air with a fine chalk. Cole cut his world down to 3 things: angles, timing, ammunition. He ran the line with his eyes, saw Ghost's cadence, Brick's reload, Doc covering Kid's shifts, Havoc's shoulders braced against a storm no one else could see. He breathed, indexed targets, and trimmed the nearest threat, a man with an RPG crouched on a fender. The tube fired as the man died, the rocket corkscrewing into the cliffs above and showering the valley with glowing fragments. More shadows spilled over the flanks. Fighters scrambled up goat paths, trying to flank along the ledges. Ghost pivoted, found them by the gleam of their lenses, and started writing a line of falling bodies across the wall. Doc switched to his magnifier, punched 2 climbers in the chests, then raked the ledge with a burst to send the rest clawing for purchase. Kid held the center like a hinge, burst count tight now, trigger work clean, muzzle never hunting, fear shoved deep and replaced by something colder. Havoc hissed a warning. Drone back on link. A low whine grew into a wasp scream, then the sharp rip of a micromunition. Cole raised his arm and swept it down. The team flattened as the blast levered a slice of the valley floor up and over them. Rock pebbled their helmets. Brick rolled to his side, snapped a launcher up, and swatted the drone with a streak of light. It broke, coughed smoke, and augured into the wreck pile at the mouth. Rotors now, far and low, coming fast. The bird was sliding in from the black water of the sky, running dark, time to station measured in a handful of breaths. But the enemy felt it, too. A last wave surged at the choke point, men shouldering through wreckage and fire, rifles barking, a fanatic push to break the line before steel arrived from above. Cole pulsed the IR strobe on his shoulder twice, the mark for friendly guns, and then filled his lane with steel. Brick popped the second directional, and the world at the valley mouth went white for a single snapping heartbeat. When it returned, men were scattered like blown straw. Ghost picked out the ones who still moved. Doc cut the last shooter who'd kept his feet, then leaned into Kid to check the young man's arm again, quick and rough. The pad was holding. The eyes were right. Keep going. The helicopter came on without lights, a black silhouette pouring rotor washed down the canyon like a river. Door guns opened in long, cold strokes, red tracers drawing rulers across the night. Cole keyed the strobe again and threw his hand forward. Time fractured into sprint and fire. They rose together. Ghost backed off the shelf with smooth, precise steps, still shooting, still surgical. Brick shouldered the last tube, spit a final tongue of flame, and ran with the empty on a sling banging his thigh. Doc shoved Kid out first and raked the left wall with suppressive bursts, calculated and cruel. Havoc hugged the drive under his plate and sprinted flat, head low, jammer pack whining. Cole came last off the line, trading bursts with muzzle flashes in the smoke and wrecks. The ramp hit the rock hard enough to bounce. The crew chief waved a tight circle. Sand exploded in horizontal sheets. The door guns stitched again, and the valley mouth turned into a meat freezer's floor. Ghost went up first and twisted to cover the rim, rifle angled past the gunner's muzzle. Brick took the ramp in 3 long strides, hooked a hand around Ghost's vest, and yanked him inside the last foot. Doc planted Kid on the deck, slid in behind, and rolled him to a bulkhead with a forearm under the shoulders and a knee against the ribs, all without losing his rifle's line. Havoc dove in with the drive, slammed it into a cargo strap, and slapped a protector over the port. Cole stepped backward onto the ramp, firing into the smoke, counting 3 more flashes, 3 more dead. The crew chief's hand clipped his shoulder. Cole pivoted, took the hand, and let the chief and Brick drag him the last step as the ramp came up and sealed the dark out with a slam that vibrated the bones. The bird clawed for air. The floor pitched, the walls shook, and the door guns raked the valley a last time. Tracers chased them, then fell away. The wreck glow shrank to a coal in the dark. The desert became a map again, then a smear, then nothing but wind and engine and the empty space that follows a battle spent to the dregs. Inside, vision turned from green to the low red of the cabin. Ghost finally looked at his arm and decided it could bleed later. Doc decided otherwise, snapped a light on, and worked with the economy of a man used to sewing under fire. Brick leaned his helmet back and let a laugh roll out of his chest until it broke into a cough. Havoc kept one hand on the drive like a father on a bassinet, and with the other thumbed through the scraps he'd stolen, eyes flicking across names, accounts, routing codes, radio net states. Kid stared at nothing, then at his hands, then at Cole, and found an anchor there that held. Cole unlatched his helmet, let it hang, and listened to the rotors. 6 men, ticked through the names the way he always did after the ramp shut. 6 alive. The ledger was brutal and simple, and tonight it paid out in a rare currency. Havoc swallowed and gave the smallest nod. Enough to prove the node. Enough to map pieces of the money and the handlers. Not enough to end a war, but enough to make someone, somewhere, lose sleep. The bird leveled. The crew chief passed water that tasted like plastic and salvation. Doc taped a pressure wrap and tucked Kid's elbow against his ribs to keep the wound quiet. Ghost finally let his head touch the bulkhead and closed his eyes without sleeping. Brick counted his empty tubes with a thumb and the ghost of a grin. Cole looked past them at the dark where the valley had been, at the coil of smoke rising into a sky that did not care, and let the picture fix in his mind. A compound burned. A tunnel turned to slag and glass. A quiet war room gutted by white fire. A drive pressed against Havoc's ribs that would turn into rooms full of people who wore suits and talked in paragraphs. The kind of proof that changed maps by inches and lives by thousands. The desert did not forgive, but sometimes it allowed passage. Tonight, it had let 6 men walk away with a serpent skin under their coats. The serpent would grow a new one. That was what serpents did. But now there were fingerprints on the old one, and they were Iranian, and they were arrogant, and they were fresh. The hello knows for home, and the thump of the blades wrote a steady line through the quiet. The mission was closed. The story was not. They would sleep a few hours, and then they would sit in another box that smelled like coffee and maps, and other people would ask what it felt like to fight in a tunnel, while servers screamed and rock fell, and the air turned to metal. Cole would give them what they needed and nothing more. Havoc would hand over the drive. Doc would mark supplies to reorder. Brick would find a new grin. Ghost would clean his rifle. Kid would wake to the memory of a knife that stopped before it found his throat and wonder why, of all the seconds in a night full of them, that was the one that made his heart race. For now, the bird flew, and the team breathed, and the desert fell away behind them. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, a phone would ring in a room with no windows, and a voice would say that a quiet node in Hellman had gone dark in the space of an hour, and someone with a title would purse a mouth and think of the men who did it. The Sand Vipers had their first kill. The next hunt was already moving. The bird sat down on the pad with a lurch that rattled teeth, rotors whipping grit into the air until the night itself felt like it stung. Crew chiefs waved them off, shouting against the roar, but the 6 men moved like shadows, bent low, gear heavy, boots dragging more than they had an hour ago. No one spoke, not until the thrum of rotors faded and the desert was replaced by the steady hum of the forward base did breath come easier. They filed through dim corridors, past walls of plywood and canvas that smelled of sweat, diesel, and damp dust. Fluorescents buzzed overhead. A medic met them at the threshold of the aid station, eyes wide at the blood on Ghost's arm and Kid's sleeve, but Doc waved him off. He'd already packed both wounds, pressure perfect, vitals steady. The medic hovered, then nodded and stepped back. Doc handled his own. Always had. Gear clattered into the armory. Rifles laid out, magazines stacked, tubes set in the racks. Ghost stripped his rifle in silence, each motion sharp despite the tremor of fatigue in his fingers. Brick leaned his launchers in the corner with a grunt and let his bulk sag into a chair, helmet clattering to the floor. Havoc dropped his jammer rig like a dead weight, tablet still clutched in one hand, eyes never leaving the glow of code he hadn't stopped reading since the bird lifted. Doc guided Kid to a cot, peeled his vest away, and started stitching in silence. Cole stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes scanning his team one by one. A knock on the frame. The CIA handler from earlier, tie still crooked, eyes wide and hungry. He reached for the drive in Havoc's hand, but Havoc angled his shoulder, clutching it tight until Cole gave a single nod. Only then did he let it go. The handler disappeared with it, already dialing a phone as he vanished into the maze of tents. The war would move to rooms with screens and papers now. But here, the war still sat heavy in 6 chests. Doc's needle bit flesh, Kid's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He stared at the ceiling instead, breath steady, the noise of the firefight still ringing in his ears. Doc finished, tied off, and pressed a fresh dressing. You're alive. That's enough. Kid nodded once. Not enough for him, not yet. but more than he'd had before. Brick leaned forward, elbows on knees, grin gone, eyes hollow. The laughter had burned out somewhere between the valley and the ramp. Now only silence sat heavy in his chest. He stared at his empty hands, scarred knuckles pale in the light, and wondered how many charges it would take to break the weight that always followed. Ghost slid the bolt back into place on his rifle, checked the chamber, closed it smooth. He finally looked up, eyes locking with Cole's. No words passed. None were needed. Ghost was still here. That was enough for now. Havoc sat against the wall, tablet dark at last, the glow finally gone. His fingers twitched still, phantom keystrokes, his mind replaying lines of code he'd only half stolen before Tehran burned the rest. Enough to trace. Enough to prove. Not enough to finish. His jaw tightened. Next time. Cole finally exhaled. He walked the room, laid a hand on each shoulder, met each pair of eyes. 6 alive. That was the ledger. But the mission wasn't done, not really. It had opened a door wider than he liked. Tehran's hand was deeper, stronger, more disciplined. The compound was only one node. There would be others. Later, when the lights dimmed and the base quieted, the team stretched out on their cots. The air hummed with generators, distant laughter, the hiss of sand against canvas walls. Kid lay awake, eyes open, the image of a knife frozen inches from his throat replaying until dawn. Doc cleaned his hands until no blood remained, though the smell lingered. Brick stared at the ceiling and let his grin return in fragments, brittle, hollow. Havoc dreamed in lines of code. Ghost didn't sleep at all, his rifle laid across his chest, eyes open, unblinking. Cole sat alone outside, the desert wind cold against his face. He watched the horizon where smoke had been hours ago, now swallowed by night. He thought of the handler, of the drive now halfway across the world, of the men who would argue over what it meant. He thought of the tunnels, the servers, the Iranians who had bled and burned but not broken. He thought of the serpent, its body long and coiled, this only one scale torn away. He closed his eyes just for a moment. The desert did not forgive, but tonight it had let them live. That was enough. Tomorrow, another order would come, another target, another place where shadows bred. The sand vipers would hunt again,